Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Halftime Talk feature interview series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Mr. Mikhail Krutikhin, co-founder of RusEnergy, based at the moment in Oslo, in Norway. Mr. Krutikhin, thanks so much for joining us today on Halftime Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you because, of course, Russia is at the top of many headlines, isn't it, today, along with others? But let's start by talking really what's the top of the news at the moment in relation to, of course, energy markets as well. But just to get your views on the prospects for the ceasefire that is trying to be choreographed by the US between Russia and Ukraine to bring a ceasefire to the conflict, and with the eventual, obviously, aim of bringing the war to an end. How hopeful are you that we're going to see this happen?
Well, I remain hopeful, of course. I would like to see the war end as soon as possible, because people are really dying in that war, and cities and villages are being destroyed. But I cannot be overly optimistic, because for now I see that there is a very big reason for the war to go on. This is unwillingness of the Russian party in this war to stop firing, to stop fighting, because the war would end immediately if the Russians withdrew from the occupied territories and stopped firing at Ukraine. They are invaders, they are occupiers, and it is the Russian army which is committing military crimes on the Ukrainian territory.
And what do you think that it would take to convince Russia to stop attacking, if you like, Ukraine? I mean, there's of course a lot of commentary out there that Russia has no intention of giving back the territory it has taken. But even putting that aside, what would it take for Russia to feel secure to say, okay, we'll stop for the night and we'll agree to a ceasefire?
For the past 3 years, very many countries have adopted a series of sanctions against Russia, and most of the sanctions were economic, financial, and a great bulk of those sanctions was targeting the Russian oil export business. And so far, we have not seen any positive results, because Russia is continuing its oil exports. And regardless of the price cap, which was established at $60 per barrel of Russian Urals blend, Russia is still getting about as much money as it was getting before the war. And so I must say that the economic sanctions are not working. The Russian leadership is not prepared to start the war under the pressure or threats of new economic sanctions, because such arguments, they do not work with Moscow.
Well, I mean, we had, as you said, I mean, yes, the last 3 years we had the price cap, as you said, designed. Perhaps one could argue that Russian oil would continue to flow, but of course it would restrict revenues to Moscow, which it indeed has, and I'm sure that we'll talk a bit about the Russian economy a bit later on. Now, there were some more stringent sanctions on ships and shipping deployed in January of this year, and that has apparently begun to impact certain Russian oil exports, for example, into China by the state refineries and elsewhere. Do you think even those sort of extra restrictions have not had an impact so far? And of course, in the context of what's happened to the oil price, because that's all obviously softened as well.
Yes, some of the recent restrictions, recent sanctions are making an effect, but the effect is well sensed by such recipients of Russian oil as China, India, Turkey, and some other countries. And we see that they are looking for some ways to, by step, the sanctions to compensate for the loss. And in China, for example, we see a number of smaller terminals and unknown companies that are prepared to receive the tankers which are under sanctions and offload the Russian oil from those tankers. In India, the consumers of Russian oil are building new chains of payment because of the sanctions against the banks. They are first finding some smaller banks abroad which are not under sanctions and paying for the Russian oil through those banks. And secondly, they have some intermediaries which are prepared to work with the cryptocurrencies. And yes, so far we are not feeling that the sanctions against the oil exports are going to work completely.
No, they haven't. I mean, we haven't seen that impacted too much. What about the impact that sanctions have had? I mean, as you said, Russia continues to sell its oil, perhaps not at the prices that it would have done before. But clearly, there are many reports that Russia's economy is in trouble. I mean, yes, the war has kept its economy going, but once this war is over, there's a lot of fallout, isn't there, for that? And where do you think that's going to leave Putin and Russia to cope, assuming that the war ends?
Well, because of the war, the Russian economy is somewhat in a distorted shape because most of the economy is working for the war. And it is the military industries which are actually working. And a lot of people switched from civil industries to military industries. And the main flow of financing from the state budget or from large Russian banks, it goes to the military industries, which do not produce anything to support the technological and social development of the country. It is most of the products of this industry are being exploded or burned at the front line and contributing nothing to the prosperity of the Russian people. And we see now that there are very dangerous alarm sounds from the financial system of Russia, because we see that the Russian central bank and the Russian finance ministry are doing what they can to support the financial system, but still the sovereign fund of Russia, which is the fund of social prosperity, called something like that, it is being depleted slowly. Maybe very soon, in a year or two, there will be no more money in Russia. And one of the ways that they are confronting this business, this danger with, is to print more money. It means huge inflation. And because of the sanctions, Russia cannot import such consumer goods or medications, for example, medical services, or even the equipment for the aging power generation stations, which are in a very awful shape. And so it is anyone's guess how long it is going to take the Russian civil economy to get destroyed, by the
Yes, I mean,
way.
I wanted to ask you about the infrastructure. I mean, you were mentioning the power stations, but just to mention the oil and gas infrastructure in general, in terms of the fact that it's probably been neglected, as you said, with everything working towards the war effort. How do you think Russia will sort of manage to revamp all of that once the war is over? And what does that mean, more importantly, for its oil exports going forward?
Well, it's a very interesting business because, considering the gas infrastructure, it is still in order, it is still workable, and the main problem was that the Russian president ordered Gazprom, which is the monopoly exporter of pipeline gas, to stop delivering gas to most of the consumers in Europe. It was no Western sanctions, no embargoes or boycotts or anything. It was the political reason when Mr. Putin decided to weaponize gas delivery to the main Russian gas market, Europe. And so far the gas business of Gazprom is all but destroyed.
I mean,
As
and
to the oil, there is another problem with the Russian oil. Russia has not had any huge discoveries of new reserves for about 15 years. And when they discover new oil fields, they are very, very small, just microscopic, I would say. And the ongoing projects are suffering from water flooding. For example, in most of the oil fields in Russia, it is not oil that comes out of the wells. It is wellhead liquid, which consists of 85% of oil and 5% of oil and 85% of dirty water. And to collect that thin film of oil from a big number of wells makes this oil very expensive. So the costs of production in Russia are growing. And if the global prices of oil go below $60 per barrel, it is going to be a very strong blow on the Russian oil industry. If it
no,
goes under 50, yes, there are such scenarios, on the global
yes.
oil market. It will be a catastrophe for the Russian oil industry. When they say that Russia is is following the rules of the OPEC plus group and restraining its oil production, it is not true because oil companies in Russia produce as much as they can. It is the natural decline of production, not
Yeah.
voluntarily decline.
Interesting. Yeah. So they're not really abiding by those quotas. No, and they are, like others, like Iran, like Iraq, being sort of viewed in special circumstances. And of course, a lot of the rest of the OPEC Plus group is taking the fall, of course, for cutting back on production. But I mean, it's interesting. Of course, $60, $50 would not be good for the Russian oil industry, but it would also not be good for the US oil industry and indeed for the rest of the OPEC nations. Yes, they're lower cost producers in OPEC, but certainly Saudi budgets are up there, at $80 or $90. So it is a softer outlook, as you say. Just to touch on the gas, Mr. Mikhail, you mentioned Europe, of course, having to look for alternatives because Russia took the decision to switch off the gas. Do you think that if Russia took the decision to bring back the gas, more pipeline gas, that Europe would resume to take some of those volumes? Of course, it's still taking Russian gas through other means, but it has replaced a lot of the pipeline gas, hasn't it? What
Well, so
is
far
Europe split on that argument?
Europe is not suffering from any shortage of gas supply. They have pipeline gas that comes from North Africa, from Norway, from fields in the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea, and LNG, liquefied natural gas. Most of that comes from the United States, but there are also supply from Qatar, from Trinidad and Tobago, and from other countries. And the problem with resuming the supply of Russian gas is mostly the problem of trust.
Yeah.
European consumers remember that it was Russia that broke the contracts and decreased the supply of gas to Europe. Now Gazprom is facing court charges of about $18 billion because Gazprom was breaking the obligations under the contracts and failing to deliver gas. Who is going to trust Mr. Trump or Mr. Putin and Gazprom after they say, yes, we are prepared to supply gas again? No, that's a very big problem of trust. And the second, it's, Europe has learned how to do without Russian gas, with the liquefied gas also from Russia. It is not exactly Russian gas because the project which supplies LNG to Europe, it is called Yamal LNG. It's an international consortium. There is a Russian company, Novatek, then there is France's Total Energy, and two Chinese companies. And they do not pay any taxes. They do not pay the royalty. They do not pay the export tax. And so this project does not contribute anything to the Russian war budget. And when in Europe they say, well, we are going to stop buying Russian LNG and stop financing the war, it is not true because they are not financing the war. They are paying for the LNG, which belongs to French companies, for Chinese companies, and so on, but not to the Russian budget.
Okay, interesting. And of course, Europe has also been buying US LNG. I'd like to talk a bit about the US in the context of, Trump obviously now a few weeks into his administration causing a lot of havoc on the international trading front. And of course, energy is one of the main products that is traded internationally and, is still flowing. I mean, producers will not stop selling their energy. It will keep going, including America, but so much uncertainty being discussed now as a result of Trump's tariff announcements, which are, whiplashing and seesawing back and forth. How much do you think how much damage has it caused, do you think, to sort of global energy flow outlook? Are people getting genuinely nervous that this is a new energy world order that is being triggered by Trump and, of course, responded to by others?
So far, I see only the negative effect on, well, maybe the oil prices or energy prices, because when you have trade wars caused by the decisions of the US administration to increase the customs tariffs and so on, you expect a slowdown in the economy of the countries which are subjected to such measures, and the prices of oil are going down. So when Trump was, if you remember, he announced that he was going to drill, baby, to drill a lot of wells and to flood the global market with new American oil and to lower the prices. And then Russia is going to suffer and accept the terms of ending the war and so on. First, someone explained to Mr. Trump that it was not possible, but that American industry cannot increase dramatically the flow of oil. And if they have new projects, the commercial production from those projects is not going to begin before 2 years or 5 years have passed, before the investments are going to flow in. And so initially, Trump went to Saudi Arabia asking for an increase of production. They did not agree. And now I think it is another measure of Trump to announce trade wars, which are depressing the price of oil globally. And but this is a weapon which can be felt by the American oil industry as well, because the American investors are not going to start, well, bringing money into new oil projects unless they are sure that the price of gas for the next several years is going to be above $60 per barrel. If it is lower, then there will be a slowdown in investments. So it's some sort of a pendulum. It goes from one side to another side. And I think we have not yet seen the equilibrium, the quiet moment of the industry, because everybody expects new trade decisions of Trump, new wars, and what is going to happen to the oil prices, energy prices, and the international exchange of energy trade. It is not. I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are lots of uncertainty there. I mean, we touched on OPEC, Russia's membership of OPEC Plus, but let's talk a bit about what their next move is, Mr. Krutikhin. I mean, OPEC Plus, led by Saudi Arabia, of course, has said it's going to return a few thousand barrels to the market starting next month, gradual re-increase in a very bearish outlook at the moment. As we've said, the oil price is on its way down or stabilizing, at least in a new slightly lower range. Do you think that OPEC was right to now announce that it's going to be adding more oil to the market, or should it have held back even more than it has done already?
I think the analysts are exaggerating the problem. Because if we look at the expectations of the oil supply globally this year, it is only about 100,000 barrels per day that is going to come additionally from the countries that are members of OPEC plus. It is not a very great increase if we see at the adopted time frame of change in the quotas and other figures inside these organizations. And it is not, it is the countries that are not members of OPEC Plus, which are going this year to supply 1.8 million barrels per day of additional oil. And I see, yes, I am in good contact with my friends in some countries of OPEC and OPEC Plus, and they say, yes, there are some feelings about, some doubts about the value of this union. Maybe if the current strategy of quotas is dropped, and if every country which is a member of this alliance starts producing as much oil as they can to go down, but they are going to make money from the volumes they are selling, but not from the price of oil, which it is very difficult for them to support on the market. Yes, it's one of the scenarios, and it is not going to happen this year, I believe. But the feelings are getting stronger and stronger in OPEC Plus, and I think maybe they will lead to a dramatic decision in this alliance.
Interesting. I mean, especially as you said, as we're seeing so much disturbance from elsewhere. I mean, OPEC Plus has been heralded, and Saudi Arabia in principle, with a couple of other members, as keeping this oil price stable in the last 2-3 years, with all the geopolitical issues, of course, that have been impacting that, and of course taking a market share cut as a result. But it's interesting, you say a lot of agree with what a few people that we talk to are saying, that patience is running out, and we might be going back to sort of a market share strategy. Mr. Krutikhin, I wanted to ask you a bit about Russia's sort of geopolitical role in the world. It's been very obviously distracted by the war in Ukraine, and that it has had to focus on that. We've also had in parallel major developments in the Middle East, in Gaza, in Palestine. You've had the Iran proxies being weakened a lot in the region. And of course, Russia played a huge role in Syria and the civil war there in the last decade or more. And of course, with the recent developments in Syria, with a new government being appointed, and of course, the international community acting on many fronts there. How do you think that Russia's influence and position in Syria is now over?
Well, we see that Russia has lost its positions in Syria, and now everything depends on the goodwill of Turkey, I believe, which is going to agree or disagree with some Russian military units remaining at two military bases, Tartus, the naval loading base, and the Khmeimim Air Force base. And I think there is a very good deal of bargaining going over between Turkey and Russia. But basically, I do not see Russia as an active player in the Middle East anywhere. Iran, Palestine, or any place, because Russia wants to be friends with everyone, and everyone in the Middle East is using Russia as some sort of a scarecrow, to get more benefits or advantages with their bargaining with the West, saying, okay, if you disagree, we are going to make more to be friends with Mr. Putin. And this is the only role that Russia is playing in the Middle East right now. It cannot buy governments. It cannot play the same role as the Soviet Union played with the, if you remember, United Arab Republic of Egypt, Iraq, and
Yes.
Syria, or in some other places. Before 1971, 1972, the Russians were very powerful
Of course.
in Egypt, in Syria, in some other countries. And there was a development of military cooperation between the Soviet Union and Iran also. So I remember it very well because I served for 2 years in the Iranian army as a lieutenant after the university, as a military interpreter, Russian and Farsi.
Ah,
And yes, there was a
fantastic.
great deal of military cooperation. It is not that way now.
No longer the case. What about Russia-China relations these days, Mr. Mikhail? I mean, China, of course, maybe behind the scenes, exerting some influence on the region here in the Gulf. Of course, it's a big consumer of oil and gas. But where do those stand today, Russia-China relations, given also what's the dynamic that each of those countries is having with the US with a new Trump presidency?
Well, it is not a union. It is not some sort of an alliance between Russia and China because they are not equal partners. The trade between China and Russia is only 3% of China's foreign trade. And Russia is the supplier of mostly raw materials to China and the buyer of a lot of consumer goods and machinery and some other good, well, sophisticated equipment even from China, but it is not equal. We see that while Russia is making some political statements about the situation in the Middle East and each of the countries, China is staying away from those conflicts and just watching because the Chinese expansion globally is mostly economic through trade, through cooperation in joint ventures and joint business, but not as a military political force somewhere in the region. No, not in the Middle East especially. But
Yeah.
it's different behavior, and we cannot compare Russia with China in this way.
Okay, Mr. Mikhail, just to wrap up before we let you go, your outlook for the oil price for the remainder of the year. I'm not telling you to predict what we're going to see. Can you give us a range in which the price will stay this year, all other things remaining equal? Will we see a recovery in the oil price back to the 80s and 90s, do you think, anytime soon?
Well, I believe that the forecasts that say that the price of oil this year might be 74 or even 77 dollar per barrel of Brent are not correct exactly. I would place it in the vicinity of maybe 68 or 69 dollars per barrel as the average for this year.
Mr. Mikhail Krutikhin, co-founder of RusEnergy, thanks so much for joining us this week on Halftime Talk. It's been great to have your views.
Thank you for inviting me.